In today's tutorial, we're going to see how to create this image in Photoshop and SketchUp. So let's get started. So for those of you that don't know, our Patreon page is now active, so you can get this complete file and the complete video on our Patreon page. So many of you may know the model from our last video. It's the model from our Market Plaza done with a design partner here in Colombia, and basically what I want to do is now more of an illustration style. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to adjust the view. So the view had some hidden geometry, so I just went to unhide it. And second of all, I wanted to align it. I wanted to be a very symmetrical classical image. So since this design had like three main parts of the roof that were very nice in composition, I aligned them to the camera, and then I exported a clay rendering. So for this clay rendering, I adjusted the safe frame that you guys can turn on in your V-Ray options for it to be more of a portrait image and not so much of a landscape image. This was because it was going to enhance the verticality of the whole design. So as soon as I had this, remember that for our clay renderings, what you guys can do is you can adjust the size of your rendering to more than 200, as you guys can see in the camera, and set the material override option on, right? So you also want to export your object ID and your render ID options, and then you just render it. So this is how the final image looks like. And what we are going to do now is export the lines file that we also have in our SketchUp model. So if you guys don't know how to export lines, you guys can go to the hidden line option and export the lines. For this image, I also exported the shadows and the textures. So if you want to export shadows, you just have to turn the shadows on in SketchUp and turn the lines off. So as you guys can see here, I saved it all in the same folder and with the same name, and for it to be in a big size, more than 2,000 to 3,000 pixels. And after I had all these images, I imported them into SketchUp. So you guys import your base renders, then you import your material ID and your alpha. And after you import these, we want to start importing our lines, our shadows, and our textures. Since these were exported in a different configuration, I manually adjusted them. So it wasn't that complicated because the safe frame of V-Ray let me know where it began and where it ended. So it adjusted perfectly. So you want to adjust this. And I also recommend something that I did in this project a lot. It was having specific layers for every different group of things, right? So for this, I had layers that were, the base images, but I also had the vegetation group for vegetation, a folder for vegetation. I also had a folder for entourage, etc., etc., etc. So this is going to make your whole workflow much more organized. After I did this, as you guys can see, the base render of our V-Ray clay rendering is a little bit too dark. It's kind of bluish. So the first thing I did was go to adjustment layers and add a black and white adjustment layer. This is going to make everything black and white and eliminate all the blue hues that you have from the V-Ray clay rendering. And second of all, what you can do is adjust the brightness and the contrast, right? So I turned the brightness up with an adjustment layer. I turned it all up and turned the contrast a little bit down. So as you guys can see, as soon as we turned the brightness up, everything looked much better. And I just did a quick sketch of what I wanted to do. So the red lines are, of vegetation I wanted to put. The grid lines I wanted to put how the entourage or the people were planning to be displayed in this image. So this is something I recommend you guys doing when you want to create an image. Just plan ahead what you want to do and what you want your image to look like. So as soon as we have this plan of the image and this base image, adjusted, I turned up the brightness just a little bit because I thought it was also still too dark. And with this shadows layer that I imported, I also set the shadows layer to multiply. When you set the shadow layer to multiply, it looks much better. And I also wanted to take into account the previous illustration we had already done, so we can, more or less have the same language and the same visualization style of the image. Okay, so after we have this, I proceeded to look for vegetation, right? So the vegetation part is very interesting, and I think is the thing that I want you guys to leave from this video. I want you guys to have the vegetation part very embedded, or the process very embedded in your own process, because it's something that sometimes we don't do consciously, and we just start importing vegetation from the back, the front, etc, etc, etc. So the way I organized this was I created 3 different folders: the background vegetation, the middle ground vegetation, and the foreground vegetation. So first I imported all the background vegetation. I imported them, and then I masked them out with the alpha channel that my V-Ray rendering gave me, right? Next, I proceeded to import the middle ground vegetation, which was these ivy leaves and also some plants. You also want to make sure that you have a vegetation that is from the same context, right? So we don't want to have pine trees with palm trees, because they look very different, and they're from different places sometimes. So this place is very close to the Amazon, so I had very tropical leaves and tropical plants and tropical trees. So as you guys can see, I'm importing all the middle ground vegetation. I'm masking it out, everything that I don't need. I'm not deleting it, I'm masking it out, because it's a non-destructive workflow. And after I create all of these groups of layers, I put them in a whole folder. And now I'm inserting the foreground vegetation. So these 2 palm trees and these ivy leaves. And for these ivy leaves, I decided to use the clone tool, which you can go with by pressing S on your keyboard. And I cloned a little bit more of ivy, because I thought, we could use some more in the middle part of the image. After adjusting a little bit of the shadows that I thought made the image look very dark, and I think I churned them off because it didn't look as cool as I wanted to. I just wanted to have a very soft color palette. I wanted to be the green. I wanted the green to have a lot of protagonism, and I wanted the white also to have a lot of protagonism. So next, I wanted to add the entourage and the elements. So I looked for market plazas in Google, and I just downloaded about 5 to 10 images, which I think could be useful for the image. And then I just with the lasso tool, by pressing L on your keyboard, you can just select what you want from the image and mask out the rest, right? So I proceeded to do this with various images. By pressing Ctrl T on your keyboard, you can resize them, and I just did this process various times. And since all of these images had more or less the same color palette, which was very colorful color palette from different market plazas around the country, I think it gave a nice tone, a nice color to the whole image. So as you guys can see here, I'm just repeating the same process over and over again. I'm importing, main images that have a lot of information to them. I'm masking them out, and I'm lowering the contrast and lowering their brightness so it doesn't have too much protagonism, and they just sit in the background very nicely. And finally, what I did was just darken the floor a little bit so it could have a little bit of a distinction from the columns and everything else. Next, I decided to adjust the crop of the image. I think I wanted it a little bit more sky. When you guys have different, more white space or more negative space, I don't know what you call it, in your image, it just makes the image breathe much more. Like, for example, if I wanted to place a diagram on top of the image, or place, I don't know, some birds, place the sun, it would look much more nice, and the image would have a lot more protagonism. It would be much more powerful than if you just crammed everything into the image, right? So that's why I decided to use the crop tool to adjust the canvas of the image. And finally, what I wanted to do was import some textures, so the image could have a little bit more. It could be much more textured and have an interesting look to it, right? So as you guys can see, if you want to get crazy, you can change the color to whatever color you want. It's something that's very used these days. It really depends on your taste. And then I imported a rice paper texture into my image. These rice paper textures were downloaded from the site called Spoon Graphics, right? So you guys can just type Spoon Graphics on Google, and they have lots of awesome textures, and these specifically I think were free textures that the guy from Spoon Graphics gave us. After doing this, I just imported also a grainy texture from Spoon Graphics, and what I did with this grainy texture to make it look like a paper texture was applied a motion blur filter to it with a 90 degree angle, and as you guys can see, it gave a lot of vertical and verticality lines to it. And finally, I just added a sun, and finally I added an orange sun just to make it look like a more post-digital image. But you guys can add some birds, add some mountains, whatever you want. It really depends on the image and the context of the image. Finally, what I did was just add a little bit of texture to it. Maybe I wanted to add a little bit more, a more handwritten style. Since this was an image divided in 3 parts, as you can see the 3 parts of the roof, I tried different things which I didn't stay with at the end. I'm sorry, but there's a lot of traffic around. So I tried different things, and this was more or less the final image that we had left. So just as a quick reminder, I just want to make sure you guys, when you're working on your Photoshop images, you work on them with different groups of layers and different folders. Also, when you work on your vegetation, make sure you work on your foreground vegetation. It's different from your middle ground and your background vegetation. And finally, you can also add different textures to the image and different things that will give the image a little bit more of your taste or of your style. So this was the final result. I hope you guys liked it. If you want to see the full tutorial, the full 2-hour tutorial, and a full PSD file, you can go to patreon.com/showitbetter to download it. And thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.